Hey guys, Jared with Backwoods Animation, and through my years within the animation industry, I've had my fair share of creating different kind of sets. You can have 2D sets that are flat, you can have 2D sets that even mimic 3D perspectives, or you can do the real thing and actually create a 3D set within After Effects, only using After Effects, and that's exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to show you step by step how to create a 3D environment using textures, lighting, and different camera moves. So that by the end of it, you're gonna have an immersive 3D set that looks beautiful. You can rotate a camera around and position it into any perspective that you'd like. So it's gonna be a really fun course, and I'm excited to share with you my process. So let's get into it. So step one, we have to design a set. So we're going to look through some inspirational photos. Hopefully you're going to pick something or have something in mind that you can build. And so I'm going to show you how I design a set. This is the foundation of our 3D environment. So it's not going to have any lighting yet, barely any camera moves, and it's just going to look pretty flat and basic. But this is the start. So it's a long process, so let's get into it. Using my original set design as a template for what I'm trying to recreate, I'm going to walk you through my process on how I created this 3D set. All in all, I'm extremely happy with how it turned out. Well, it's moving kind of slow. I think it's just so cool what you can do with After Effects, and I really want to broaden your horizon on what is possible with After Effects. So I'm going to show you a few different things you can do to create some pretty cool 3D elements. So getting started, we're going to create a new composition. You can come down to this button here to create new composition, or you can go composition, new composition. I'm going to rename mine set 2. And my parameters, because I'm dealing with standard aspect ratios, I'm going to do 1920 by 1080. And I'll do a frame rate of 29.97, and I don't need 15 minutes. I probably barely even need 10 seconds. So I'm just gonna do 10 seconds. All right, then hit OK. And we are now left with the blank slate. What do? Well, what we have to do is we have to start envisioning what our set is going to look like. So the first thing that I do is I find some inspiration. So I found these inspirational images to get a feel of the warmth that I was going for. This is the image that I landed on that had kind of the layout I liked. And the other ones were just kind of like the warmth of the feel that I was going for. Dramatic lighting, that warm mood. So using this as my template, I'm going to start creating things like brick walls, floors, and some rafters on the ceiling. Because I've already spent time finding my textures and exploring what it's going to look like, I'm not going to waste your time by looking for that stuff. I'm just going to use the things that I've already found. So here in my walls section, I'll bring in the back wall. So mine's called wall 2. So when we bring in wall 2, it's a composition. So if I go inside my composition, I have all my design elements within that composition. The composition itself is set up the same way as our first one. It's 1920 by 1080, 29.97 seconds, and the duration's a little longer, but that's okay. So coming back into my set 2, which is the composition I'm going to create all of my 3D elements in, I'm going to go ahead and check this box right here. This turns it into 3D. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to push it backwards in Z space. So by grabbing the blue arrow where it says Z, pull it downward and it's going to push it back in Z space. Next, I'm going to bring in my other wall. I'm going to turn the 3D on for this, and I'm going to hit W on the keyboard. And this is, I'm going to grab the Y, and this is going to allow me to rotate my composition. So if I start to rotate the Y, you'll see it's turning, and if I hold Shift, I can lock it in at a perfect 90 degrees. So that's what I'm going to do. Next, I'm going to hit V on the keyboard, and I'm going to move this over like so. You can already see I've pushed the wall 2 back too far. And we'll be able to kind of realign things once we're done. But you want to make sure that things are close to touching as possible. So as I pull this forward, you'll see that it breaks the plane of the brick wall, the red brick wall. That means they're intersecting. So I'm going to pull it back to where they don't cross paths, which means that they're just about touching. Next, I'm going to push this one all the way to the edge to where the corners meet up. All right. So then finally I can bring wall 3, which is just a blank brick wall, turn the 3D on, and I'll rotate it in the opposite direction. And I can push it forward. Or not forward, to the right. Okay, you can see there's a little space happening right here. And I can pull it forward to close that gap in. All right, now that we're working in 3D, I'm also going to go over a little bit on how I get this effect, because it already looks like it has lighting in it, but there's no lighting whatsoever. The way that I achieved this lighting is that when light bounces off of a wall, it typically bounces past the corners. So in order to give it that more depth to your scene, I added a few things. I'll go to a different wall. Let me do this wall. So this is the brick wall that we start with. In order to give it some more depth to it, I added a little trim on the border. So it's a border trim on the floor. You would find that in most interior spaces, like a home or in this case a cafe or a bakery. Next thing that I added was this radial gradient on top. And so this just gives you that nice faded look to the corners of your walls. So it's simply just a radial gradient which has one side of the opacity turned off, which is the center, and then the far side of the opacity is turned to 70. I don't need 3 in there. It can just be 2 like that. Hit OK, and you can see how it functions. So this is the center of my gradient, and then I just pulled it to the edge. And we are good. And the cool thing about this is now that I can copy this by doing Control-C, and I can paste this onto other areas of the I can paste it onto other compositions, so it'd be Control-V, and I can get the same effect throughout to keep the consistency. Okay, so now that I've got my wall set up, I'm going to go ahead and pull the floor in. We'll turn the floor to 3D, and I will rotate it 90 degrees that way, hit V on the keyboard, and I'm going to pull it down in this location. Okay, it's looking good. Now the ground plane's a little different. So I couldn't do a 1920 by 1080 ground plane or a floor because if you look at all three walls, they're all 1920 by 1080. So I needed to extend the floor, and the way that I did that is it's a square. So it's a 1920 by 1920 aspect ratio. So that's the size that you need. Next, what I did was I created just some basic shapes. Not basic shapes, triangles. And I'm not sure how many there are. There's like 4, 8, 12, 16. So 16 rectangles. And then I used what's called the repeater. So if you select your contents, go add, you select repeater. And what repeater does is it takes the image that you have or the shape layers that you have, and it allows you to recreate that image over and over again so that you don't have to duplicate hundreds of versions of this tile. So you adjust things like, 1, the number of copies. I have 15. I don't think I need 15. I probably just need, I don't know, maybe 5. Maybe even 4. Yeah, 4, sure. And then you can adjust the position. So adjusting the position, you can see it pushes the copies either away from each other or towards each other. And so I was just using the spacing that I had between my originals to get the spacing between the copies. Once you have one repeater done and it's going in the X position, you can duplicate that repeater and switch it around. So we'll do 5 copies. Oh, that one needs more. How many do you need? 10? We'll leave it at 10. All right, so next, I changed the position on the Y-axis. So now it goes down into the spacing that I need. Any farther and it gets too wide. And so that is how you set that up. So that's just a simple way of tiling or repeating certain things. Sorry, I went into a very long explanation, but here is also another tip. I added that same effect to the edges of this. All right, and so now we're starting to get somewhere. It's looking pretty good. But now I have a ceiling to drop in. My ceiling is just a very basic shape. It's also 1920 by 1920 to keep in that square ratio. And then I'm just gonna move it up. So now that I have 4 walls, or 3 walls and a ceiling and a floor, we're gonna create a camera so we can look around in this 3D dimension. So come up here to Layer, New, and we're gonna create a new camera. I'm not gonna go into detail just yet on what the camera focal lengths do, but just do 35 millimeter for now. And when you create it, it's gonna throw it off just a little bit. So your camera, if you turn it off, it goes back to your basic, your neutral built-in camera that you can see. But when you turn it on, it gives you a little bit of a different focal length. So if you hit C on your keyboard, it's gonna give you a whole bunch of different things that you can use. If you click until you see a dot with a circling arrow around it, that's your rotation. So click anywhere on your composition and you can rotate your scene. Maybe go down to like 1/3 so you can move it a little bit better. But you can see we're starting to get some cool stuff. And if you hit C again and find the ball with 2 arrows up and down, you can zoom in or zoom out. So just play around with these different ways that you can manipulate the camera just by hitting C on the keyboard. You have one that can move the whole camera. You can rotate, which is cool. And so now we're starting to use the camera a little bit. And if you ever want to go back to your neutral pose, all you have to do is turn your camera off. And there you go. So we're going to use the camera to start adding some of the cool 3D elements into our set. So now that all my walls are done, I'm going to move into things like the design elements. So I have wooden beams that go across the top of the ceiling. So I'm going to drop in a wooden beam, hit the 3D, and I'm going to move this into position. It goes right up here at the top to the ceiling, and I'll move it back towards the wall. Going into the wooden beam, let's look at what I have. This is actually a very large wooden texture, but I only needed a small portion for the wooden beam. So if you come into my composition settings, you can see the width is 1920. Most everything that you're creating is going to be 1920. My height is only 80 though. And then to give it a little bit more depth to it, I added this nice shading from where the top of the ceiling would be down to the exposed edge of the beam. That just gives it a much nicer shadow. So you're not depending so much upon your lighting to give you shadows, but you're actually creating the shadows yourself. Because the lighting that we're going to create is not perfect. It does a really, really great job, but it doesn't take you all the way. So little tricks here and there to really make your scene pop are going to go a long way. So next I'm going to duplicate these wooden beams. I have another one, which is the same wooden beam, but I moved the texture around to give more variety to my scene. So I'm going to move this back, maybe like so. And then I'm going to duplicate the other wooden beam and pull that one forward. And we'll duplicate this one and pull it forward. All right, so now we're starting to get some cool stuff happening in here. Oh, and I should mention, you can see that I'm using real textures. If you want to recreate your textures in here to give it more of a cartoony look, you can do that. I might even go back and do that at some point. But just for time's sake, I just grabbed some images from Google or Bing and I dropped them in just to get an idea of what's actually happening and is this gonna work, you know? So I'm using these cool textures. So next, what do we have? We have some lights. Now the lights are kind of tricky. The lights, they don't actually have 3D inside of them. You can see it's rounded and maybe you're thinking, oh cool, it's like a cone shape. Well, unfortunately, no, it's not. Let me just move these into place and then I'll show you what's happening. We'll pull this down, pull it out from the center. We'll duplicate. Pull this one over. We're going to do 4 lights, and I want to make sure that they're kind of positioned pretty equally within the space. Just like so. And just like so. All right, so that's looking pretty good. So I'll turn my camera back on. So these lights work really well at a distance and relatively close up. You know, they probably do their best work like right around here. The reason that they're not actually 3D
is because you come inside, you can see that I designed it as a flat image, just like this. Knowing that most of my camera work was going to be shot from a low angle, I decided to do this shape and design it with a 3D perspective from the start. From the get-go, I knew you're not able to create these kind of shapes within After Effects. Unfortunately, After Effects just isn't designed to be creating these kind of things. You can get by with really basic 3D objects, but when you get into actually trying to create complex shapes, it just doesn't work. So I just created a very simple cone with an ellipse. You can see it all just moves around like so. So I squashed these circles into these ellipses to give the effect of a perspective. So with that in mind, just be very careful and wary of the camera angles that you do use if you choose to use a lighting source like this. All right, next I'm going to start adding some really cool stuff. I have a plant. I'm going to use the plant later. Actually, I'll do it now because I don't want to forget about it. So the plant is very simple. Let me move into place. I created these plants to be kind of like be objects that were placed in the back, maybe a little bit in a dark corner so that they weren't noticed very well. And I'll rotate it out just a little bit. And then I'll do another plant here, turn 3D on. We'll drop it down. And I'll push it back. And I'll rotate it this way. Okay, so now my plants are in position. Let me show you how I created the plant. So the plant is just a 2D plant. Okay, there's no depth to it. But when you get into the 3D, when you get into building out your 3D sets, this is still gonna cast shadows just like a 3D plant or object would. So it does a pretty good job of giving that sense of depth when you have lighting on it and it's projecting a shadow. The composition settings for this one are a width of 300 pixels by 600 pixels. So it's not very big. And you can do a composition size however large you want, but I like to keep my compositions relatively set around the size of the object they are. So now we're starting to get a set that's coming together, but let's add some stuff like furniture. I'm going to start off with my countertop. I'm going to drop it in, turn on 3D, and this is where it's going to get a little tricky and maybe a little complicated, so stick with me. So right now I turned my 3D on for the composition. If I rotate, it looks flat, doesn't it? It's not quite what you want for a fully 3D set. But if I come here to this continual rasterization button and click it, something happens. Okay, so now we're starting to get a 3D object. Unfortunately, no, it doesn't just extrude your objects for you. You actually have to create your own 3D object. So let me go inside the composition and show you what I have done. First, I'm going to place this into position. While I'm doing this, I'm going to talk about the strokes. I wanted there to be strokes around things. So this black line around the object, the plants, and this countertop, I wanted the stroke to be there because I'm only mimicking 3D. I'm not trying to create a fully believable 3D set. Okay, so it brings that level of cartoony, non-realistic to a rather nicely lit, realistic set. So it kind of melds the two worlds together. And so that's the look that I was trying to achieve, is something that I'm not trying to pass off as hyper-realistic, but I'm trying to pass off as a hyper-realized set that a character with a line stroke could be inhabiting. And so that's why I created the line stroke. Next, I'm going to go inside and show you what's going on here. All right, so looking at it from the front, it looks normal. But it's going to be a little complicated. So let me talk about some things here. Let's talk about just the countertop for now. So I'm going to go into 4 views. So these are my 4 views. I have a top view up here. I have a, what is this? Active camera view, front view, and a right view. I think I might just need to build it out to show you how I did it. All right, so let's do this. Let's say that this is my countertop. Do a stroke of 2, and I'll do a solid fill that is blue. So in order to get this countertop to be 3D, you need to turn it on as 3D. Before I do that, I'm going to design on a separate layer. Well, I can turn the 3D on, but I'm going to design on a separate layer the front of my countertop, and on another layer, I'll design the side of my countertop. And these are functioning just like a cardboard box would function. Okay, so we're creating the flaps that we're going to fold around. So I'm going to turn 3D on for these 2 guys, and I'm going to rename them. So this will be my countertop, this will be my front, and this will be my side. So now with my side selected, I'm going to hit Y on the keyboard. I'm going to lower down my anchor point, and then I'm going to put it right here on the edge. And I'm going to do the same thing to the front. Hit Y on the keyboard, lower your anchor point right here on the edge where the 2 meet. Next, I'm going to select both of them, and I'm going to parent them to the countertop. And I'm going to move my anchor point to the center of my countertop. All right, so now with that set up, I'm going to rotate my countertop 90 degrees, move it into position, and then I can start to rotate. I'll rotate the front down 90, and I'll rotate the side down 90 degrees. And if it doesn't line up, hopefully you got pretty close, but if it doesn't, you can just scale it upward till they meet. All right, and so now that that's set up, what we can do is we're gonna duplicate the side, Control D, and I'm gonna grab this Z space and move it over to the other side of the countertop. And I'll do the same thing with the front. And this is where your multiple views come in. So if you click on this and go 4 views, you can see here, let me turn this off. You can see here that my front portion needs to now come to the back. And there you go. And if things aren't lined up perfectly, like if it's like this outside of it, you're going to start to see cracks within your 3D objects that you've designed. So try to keep it as close as possible, and you will be doing yourself a big favor. All right, so that's how we create these 3D objects. And essentially, this is what I do for everything that I'm gonna make. And I'll show you how it looks. So I guess I could have created a camera. Anyway, so now we have this countertop, and that's basically how it works. Hopefully it's not too confusing, and hopefully you can understand it. Next, I have this countertop base. The base is a small composition, kind of set up around the size of this artwork that I have. And again, I've created some design elements to mimic the lighting of a 3D effect. Okay. So if we come back into the countertop, you can see, let me just create a camera so we can look at this. Layer, new, camera. Click OK. So you can see I have a countertop base, which is the front, and then I have one on the side. So the way that I got the one on the side was I duplicated the front plane, rotated it, and moved it forward. Once I had it moved forward, I lined up the corners, and then I simply came up to this square, which is your rectangle tool, and I created a mask. So you see I masked out to where the back of the counter is. If I keep going, it extends it, or if I do it farther, it makes it shorter. So that's how I created the sides. I'm going to turn off my camera. Next, we have the showcase. Now the showcase is a little more complex. And again, you can see I have my rasterized layer turned on so that it's not a flat 3D object, but it's actually extruded. So if I come inside of this one, I'll do one view, and I'm going to create a camera so we can look. So if I create a camera, you can see that I have designed a lot of stuff in 3D in here. So using the countertop method, I created this case. There's not a lot of special things happening to make this case look how it is. I basically just created square shapes and then rotated them to be the angles of the cutouts in my case. Instead of changing the opacity of this shape layer, which would have changed the opacity of the stroke, I changed just the opacity of the glass within my shape layer. So you can see my opacity I turned down to 20. And so that's how I got that glass effect. And then everything else, which is the which is like the muffins and the cinnamon rolls and all these baked goods, they're just 2D layers that I turned 3D on. So essentially it's just something that I designed using the pen tool. You know, make it as simple or as complex as you want. It's flat, there's nothing three-dimensional about it. But I turned on the 3D and pushed it back in Z space to give that depth. So that's how I created this showcase. And then I imported that showcase into my countertop composition, turn the rasterize on, turn the 3D on, and then I just moved this around until it fit exactly where I wanted it, just like so. And the reason I did that is so that when I come into my set 2, I only have one layer. It's countertop. I'm trying to minimize the amount of layers within my set composition, so it makes it easy to manage all my files. So with that in mind, I duplicated this countertop and made it to a countertop 2. And then within this one, I adjusted the sizing of it so that it looks like the original, but it's a little bit shorter. So I'm gonna pull this one in, turn these guys on, and put it into position. So working in 3D with After Effects is pretty straightforward. Thankfully, it's not super complicated as far as, designing 3D objects. This is a relatively simple way of doing 3D. And because they limit you, you don't have to worry about the headache of certain things that you do when you're designing in a 3D package. They give you very basic tools, which I guess makes it easier on you. All right, and then finally we have some furniture. So we have chairs and a tabletop. So I'm gonna import my chair first. Turn 3D on and my rasterize. And so just like the countertop, I designed these 3D objects. So we have a side, which is using just the pen tool, like so. I drew it out, boom, 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 boom. And then I moved it in 3D space. And once I got one side done, all I had to do was duplicate it and then move it over. Okay, so that's how that works. Next, I created the seat. I did the seat the exact same way that I did the countertop. So it's basically just a countertop with legs. And then there's a backing to it. Okay, so the chair is very simple. And make sure all your 3D layers are turned on. Coming back to set. All right, let's turn 3D on. And I'm gonna move this guy around. I'll drop it to the floor. And you can see I made the chair too small. If you've created an object and you find out it's too small, hopefully you can get away with just scaling it, and hopefully that works. If it doesn't, you might need to go back inside your composition and recreate it. But that looks pretty good for me. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna duplicate that chair, hit W, and I'm gonna rotate it 180 degrees. Then I'm gonna pull it forward away from the other chair. Okay, I'll pull it out. Next, I'm gonna grab this tabletop. I'm gonna put it right there and turn everything on. I'm gonna lower the tabletop to hit the ground. Okay, I can see I want it to be a little bigger, so I'll scale it up. I'll move it a little higher. That looks pretty good. I'll move the tabletop in between the chairs. And it looks like I'll pull it out just a little bit. All right, next I'm gonna attach the chairs to the tabletop. And this way I can now rotate the table and the chairs to give it a better perspective on what's happening. So this chair looks pretty good where it's at. This chair is definitely not in the right spot. All right, that'll work. Now, if you're looking at the table, you can see that it breaks through the 3D breaks right here. It doesn't look good. Like I said, we're just mimicking 3D, okay? So most of these shots aren't gonna be like full on trying to see the table. If they are, you're gonna need to fix that. All right, let's make sure we're pretty close to the ground. There we go. And then I'm going to rotate this back to 90 or whatever. And I'm going to move this over to the corner. Now I'm going to set these up to kind of be like they're in a cafe or a bakery. So let me turn off this camera and move this maybe a little closer to the wall. I'm going to select them all, duplicate, and then I'll move this table across the way. Let me turn that camera back on. Zoom in a little bit. All right, so this big blank spot in the wall, this is where my door is going to be. And these white spots are where my windows are going to be. So let me make sure I move this out of the way of the door. Put it in front of the window. And I'll move it off a little bit. We'll rotate this. All right, and now that we have that up, I'm going to do one more table in chair combo. And this one, I'm going to move to the center. And then I'm going to rotate it a little bit, just like so. All right, so now we've got a pretty cool setup. But now we have to create some windows for our light to come through. So how are we going to do that? So let's rotate over to our windows. Let's zoom in a little bit. All right, okay, there we go. So now that I have my window selected, let me go back into this wall and show you how I did it. So basically I just put these white shapes where I wanted my windows to go. So using these as my reference or my template, I'm going to select the wall that has the window outlets, select your rectangle tool, and within the frame of this white spot, we'll go ahead and we'll expand it out. Now these are going to add, and we want it to subtract. Okay, hey, and there you go. That worked out pretty good, actually. Next, what we can do, because my windows are the same size, I'm pretty sure they're the same size, I'm going to select that mask and duplicate it. So hit V on the keyboard once you've duplicated it and it's selected, and just move it over by holding Shift. I'm sorry, ignore that advice. We're going to do it again. So select your rectangle tool, and we're going to mask out our window. And then we have to change it to a subtract. And now we have two windows. Right now they have the checker background looking out into your grid, but we're going to change that. Okay. I'm just going to turn this camera off so I can see what I'm doing. And finally, the very last thing that I have to do is I have a door. Where's my door? There it is. Okay. So let me bring my door down. I'm going to turn on 3D, and I don't need to check the rasterize button because there's nothing in there that's 3D, it's all just 2D. So then I'm going to hit W on the keyboard, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees to where it's flat to me, and I'm going to move it over towards the wall. Whoops. And then I'm probably gonna need my camera for this. So I'll turn my camera back on and I'm gonna rotate to where the front door goes. And this camera's kind of tight, so whenever we get into the camera portion of this, we'll be able to get maybe a little bit better camera for this tiny position or tiny location that we're working with. But for now, this will work. So let me push this in to where we have contact with the wall. There we go. So I just passed through it, so I'm going to pull it forward to where it's just in front of the wall. All right, there we go. Now I'll move it down to my ground plane. So we have some intersection, and then I'll move it into position, right in between these windows. All right, finally, we now need to cut out the wall for the door. So we'll do the rectangle tool again, and we'll just do the window, because I don't plan on opening the door at this point. So we'll just do the window. There we go. So now our set is done. We have completed our set and it looks pretty cool. Not quite. It's looking good, but now we have to add that lighting element. That lighting is gonna make it go from an okay 3D set to a whoa, that looks pretty sweet 3D set. So let's move on to the next section.
So hopefully by now your 3D set's looking pretty good. You've got 4 walls or 3 walls, ceiling and a floor, and some cool stuff in between. But now we're gonna set up our camera. I'm gonna walk you through the different kind of cameras that I use and how they all work, at least to the best of my ability. So let's get into it.
So now that we have our design set up, we're gonna choose a camera that best suits our location. I'm gonna talk a little bit about how the cameras work, and we'll find the one that fits best for you. So I'm gonna delete this camera. So in order to create a camera, you can right click, go new, camera, or you can go layer new camera. So looking at this camera, to be honest, I don't have extensive knowledge on the camera settings or how they work. All I know is if you click this, the smaller your millimeter dimensions are, the longer your lens is going to be. And the bigger it is, the shorter your lens is going to be. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So if I click 15, hit OK, you're going to see that I can get some pretty long views out of this thing, right? So that looks pretty cool, doesn't it? We're starting to get this kind of cool elongated effect. And because my set is relatively small, that might be a good camera choice for me. But I don't know if I want one this small. It definitely makes the room feel bigger though. If you select a camera and maybe you've animated it or you've set up something to it that you really like and you don't want to delete it, all you do is select your camera, come up here to layer and go camera settings. And then we can adjust the millimeter size. Now if we go up to 200, you can see what's happening here. It's like really flat. I think now I'm going to turn this depth of field off for a second. So let's see how far out we can zoom and see what's happening. Yeah, it's really interesting. Definitely not what I want to do, because it makes it feel like a very small set, doesn't it? All right, this might be good for like a landscape or something of that nature. I honestly have no idea. So I'm gonna go for something probably towards the smaller end, just because my set is so small. So I'll go layer, camera settings, and I'll do 24 millimeters. Actually, so I don't have to zoom in all the time, I'm just gonna create a new one. New camera, 24. Another thing to note, I'm gonna turn on my depth of field. And what your depth of field does is it creates a focal point that your camera looks at, and it says this is the point of which total focus is gonna be. Everything else is kind of gonna fade off. Okay, so if I pick an object like, well, here, let me zoom out. Let me zoom out a bit. So if I pick an object like the back wall, which is wall 2, so if I go wall 2 and then I come up, hold control and click my camera, when I right click, what I can do is I'll go to camera and I can either set the focus to that distance, which is kind of like a one-time shot, or I can link the focus to that distance, which means that no matter where I put my camera, it's always going to stay focused on that. And if I come into my camera options and I push this way up, you can see things are starting to blur out. This gives that more kind of like miniature set feel, I guess you could say, or more of that artsy feel to where there's a very close focal point. This is a really cool thing to do. It's not always going to work, and it's not always going to be something that you want to do. Typically with long shots like this one, where it's across the room, you don't have so much of an extreme aperture. But if you get closer to a subject, like you're doing just somebody's face, then you would have a really tight focal distance or focal point with a very high aperture. That's usually how that works. So that is about the extent of my knowledge. I'll get into more about animating cameras later on, but this is just picking a camera for your set and for your camera shot. Another thing to note is you can duplicate cameras and you can change them around. So now I'm on camera 2, I can move it over here and say that this is now my shot. Okay, and so I'm creating different cameras, and if I turn it off, it goes back to camera 1. And if I duplicate that camera, and let's say I do this, so what's happening is we're just creating different cameras, and it only acknowledges the camera on top that's turned on. So if I turn off camera 3, it now goes to camera 2. And if I turn off camera 2, it now goes to camera 1. This is a way of setting up different cameras without having to adjust any attributes and keyframe anything. So you would simply just, do like this for your different cameras. All right, so as this timeline goes, you'll see that we have cameras that switch. Oops, when they're turned on. All right, so that's the extent of my camera knowledge. But now what we're gonna jump into is the lighting. So let's talk about lighting and see how we can really make this set come alive.
So now we're going to talk about lighting. Lighting is what sets the mood for your scene. Without lighting, you have a pretty boring. Let me try this again. So now we're going to talk about lighting. Lighting is what sets the mood for your scene. It could be dark or warm. without it, your scene's going to be very boring. So I'm going to talk to you about how I set up my lights to create that warm kind of sunset or golden hour glow. And yeah, so lighting's the fun part. So let's get into it.
In order to get lights, what we're going to be doing is we're going to go Layer, New, Layer, New, and we're going to select Light. The kind of light that we're going to get, or the kind of light we're going to start with, is going to be a parallel light. And our intensity, we could probably go to like 150. Let's see. And make sure Cast Shadows is selected, and Shadow Darkness is 100. Hit OK, and it's going to do some weird stuff. All right, so now what we can do is we're going to move all this around to really get the effect that we want. So Cast Shadows is on. Something that I didn't talk about or explain, because we're working in 3D objects, it creates its own material options. So you want to make sure that everything that casts a shadow is casting a shadow. So this wall I don't think needs to cast a shadow. But make sure that it can accept shadows and that it accepts lights. All right, and then we'll go to, the reason we're not getting any lighting in here is because wall 2, why do I have 2 walls? Wall 1, what we need to do, so we need to come into our material options and we need Cast Shadows turned on. And now you're going to see it's starting to cast those shadows. Next, what we're going to do is come to the ceiling. We want our ceiling to cast a shadow as well. And these beams, we want to make sure that they cast shadows as well. And another way that we can do this so that we don't have to keep going back and forth is just select material options, Control C, and then on everything you want to cast a shadow, just Control V. Okay, and anything that has this rasterization check mark, this little star, if you go inside, as long as that option has been checked on the inside here, so it's casting shadows, it doesn't need to say it here, and in fact it even turns off any geometry options for that layer. So it's reading only what you've set up on the inside here. So make sure it's turned on within that composition. And then we'll come here and we'll make sure that the door casts a shadow too. All right, is there anything else that we need to cast a shadow? I don't think so. So this lighting's looking pretty good. I want this to stretch a little bit more. So we'll come into the transform options and we're going to adjust the point of interest. Just play around with this section until the lighting that you want is casting a shadow in the way that you desire. All right, that's looking pretty good. Next, what I'm going to do, right-click New, Light. I'm going to create an ambient light. Your ambient light can be at maybe 20%. Click OK. And it's going to lighten the entire scene. So now we're able to see everything. Next, what we want to do is we're going to create a few spotlights for where these lights might be hitting. So right click new, we're going to go light, and we'll do spot. The intensity of these can be, I don't know, maybe 40. Make sure cast shadows is on. And what we'll do is we'll pick this up to the ceiling. I'm going to turn on my 4 views. I'm going to move this over the lights, which are these 4 lines here. Okay, just like so. I'm going to make sure that it's raised high enough. Okay, so if this is my ceiling up here, you want to make sure that it goes up to the ceiling. And then I'm going to pull the light direction down. And I'll make sure that it's going kind of in towards my set. And maybe not quite that far in. We'll go like right there. All right, now I'll do one view, and we'll adjust some of the settings for this spotlight. Let's turn this down to half. Cone angle, let's turn it up. I want to see it on that wall. So the fact that I can't see it yet is kind of alarming. Let's see what's happening here. So what's going on to make it not show up on that wall? So I don't need it that intense. I don't need the cone angle that intense. Let's try my transform. So we'll pull this down. Pull it maybe out, I don't know. Let's go back to 4 views. Let's see what we're doing here. That's right, this is the front view. And this is the top view. Oh, there we go. We're getting a light over here now. Oh, I think because it's breaking through the ceiling, that's why. So you want to make sure it's not going through the ceiling. All right, so we'll pull it back here into the corner, and don't let it go through the ceiling. There we go. All right, so now I'll go, well, while I got it, let's move this inward to hit right there in the back. All right, all that looks pretty good. So we'll go back to one view. Let's turn the intensity down to 40. Don't want it too intense. And let's change the cone angle inward a little bit. And let's look at the cone feather. We want it to be feathered a little bit. Let's have that come up the wall a little bit more. Feather it to like 30. All right, and once that light's looking pretty good, you can duplicate it and move it to the other side. And let's see how this is looking. I'm going to turn the intensity on this one up a little bit. Whoops, wrong one. All right, we'll go to like 65 or something like that. See how it does. All right, that's not too bad. Okay. So let's look at our original set to see some other things. So what's going on here with the lighting? It looks like I have another light up here. So I have an ambient, a parallel, and then my two spotlights. And then I have another spotlight, which is shining on that wall to kind of fill in the rest. So this has an intensity of 100, cone angle of 85, and a cone feather of 46. So let's go ahead and create that light. So layer new, light, spot. So this had an intensity of 100, cone angle of 85, and that's fine, 50. All right, so then I'm gonna move this over and up. And I'm gonna pull this one across the room. So let's look at our 4 views to make sure that everything is kind of hitting where it needs to. So let's move this over a little bit. And we'll make sure that it is hitting, whoops. We'll make sure that it's hitting this wall. So this is my top view. Let's look at a more of like a front view to make sure that's looking good. That looks pretty good. All right, so now let's look at it. Cool, so now we're starting to get some cool lighting happening. Okay, so finally what you're looking at, you might be saying, well, how do we hide this checkered background? The way that I did it, if you have a picture would work just great. I kind of have an animated background already that goes along with this set, so that's what I used. So if I come back in here, it's called intro. So I'm just gonna copy that and paste it, and then I'll move it over. So let me show you what's happening in this intro animation. So it's essentially a 19 by 20 set that I've already created. It's got some characters walking in it, and it's got some background buildings and trees. If you have footage, video, or a picture, that would work just fine. So all you do is import it into your set, and then rotate it and push it past the wall. Okay, so that fills in our lighting just fine. But another thing you have to make sure, because this will block your parallel light from entering the windows, so you have to make sure that it does not cast shadows, it does not accept shadows, and it does not accept lights. Once those are turned off, you're good to go. Finally, because I didn't want this to be a focal point at any point, I did a camera blur. So if you select your object, go Effect, Blur and Sharpen, I did a camera lens blur. And I did it at 17. So turn your radius up until it looks good. Mine was at 17. And the next I did levels to make it brighter. So I added the effect, color correction, levels. So once you get your levels, what I did was I crunched this inward to give more contrast, and then I pulled out the black. So I grabbed this black triangle, and pulled it in. And so that just kind of whitewashes everything. All right. And so that is essentially all the lighting that we need. It looks good, but now where it's going to really shine and take off is when we start to adjust the effects. We're going to do some color correcting, and we're going to add some glows to it to make it really pop and give it that warm sunset feel.
So hopefully your scene's lit and looking beautiful. So now what we're going to do is put the finishing touches on it to really make it glow and set the tone, the color tone. We're going to do things like some glow effects and some color correction to really get it to that maximum level of beauty that you're trying to achieve. And it really, this like last 5% is really what makes your scene shine. So don't ignore it and don't skip this step, because it's going to take your scene from it looks nice to, oh, that's what I'm talking about. Let's get into it.
So next what we need to do is we need to add something. So we're going to go layer new, whoops, and we're going to add an adjustment layer. This adjustment layer goes on top of everything. So it's a one-stop shop. You add one effect and it manipulates the whole image. The reason that we do that is so that we don't have to duplicate an effect across multiple assets. You just do it one place. Makes it real simple. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to add some curves. So come on down here to color correction, and we're going to go curves. This is where we can start to adjust some of the coloring. So I'm going to select red, and we'll start with red. And we'll add a little red to it. Start to warm it up. Then we'll go to green. Maybe we'll add a little green to it. And then we'll go to blue. And maybe we'll pull blue out. And that's looking okay. Maybe the green will stay. All right, that's looking better. Okay, and then next we're going to go RGB. And this is going to be your lightness and your darkness. So it'll either pull your highlights way up and pull your shadows way down to really give that contrast, or you can just very subtly manipulate it so that it's giving it that nice pop of lighting that you're looking for. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Next, what we're going to try to do, and we can come back to this in a minute and we'll affect it. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to come down here to stylize, and we're going to add a glow. So that glow, it might be a little too much. So let's try going down to 0, which blows everything out. And we'll increase this. And then let's see if we do like 0.01 for the intensity. It adds a nice little glow to it. It's very subtle. Let's turn this down into the 20s, and then maybe we'll do 0.02. That's looking better. Okay. I like it. I like where this is going. If we turn this up, what happens? I guess it turns it down. All right, so threshold we'll put to 0. Glow radius we'll put to 25. And your glow intensity we'll put to 0.2. Another thing that we might want to do is these lights are getting some shadows on them. You might not want that to be happening, so What we'll do is we'll go cast shadows on, accept shadows off. Okay, and once you have that set up, just copy your material options and paste it to the rest of the lights. And that looks better. It looks like it's actually giving light to it. All right, now this is looking pretty good. You can see my original set is a little bit brighter. This one's got more yellow to it, a little more warm. So this would just take some playing around with as far as the curves and the glow in order to get it to match the original set. That's not what I want. Another way to brighten it up is if we come to our ambient light, we might be able to bump this up to make the scene brighter. Or you might like it exactly how it is. So yeah, this is looking pretty good. I'm really pleased with how this set turned out. Yeah, so we can play around with the, oops, I need to have a camera turned on. So we can play around with the camera settings to see how everything's actually playing out. Does it look pretty good? Are there some things that we need to adjust? Right now I'm going to turn my depth of field off so that everything's clear. And we can start to play around with it. I'll zoom out. That's looking really cool. I'm like really happy with how that one turned out. I did it a heck of a lot quicker than the first one, that's for sure. So I hope that your lighting and effects are coming together real nicely and it's looking good. Just keep playing around with it to get that perfect color tone to exactly what you're doing.
So by this point, your scene's done. It's looking great. Now we're going to talk about the camera animation. Maybe you've played around with it a little bit already, which is fine and great. I'm glad that you're exploring. But I'm going to talk to you about how you set up keyframes, how you set up focal depths, and even how you rig a camera to animate it with a null object. So let's get into it.
Finally, we're going to talk about the camera animation. This is going to be a very brief part, but it is something you need to know. So let's jump into that. So talking through the camera options for moving, for the camera moves, the way to actually get a camera movement, there's a couple of ways. The first way is to select your camera, keyframe your point of interest in your position. Once you've put the camera exactly where you want it, you'll keyframe it, and then you'll move forward on the timeline to the next position. We'll say 3 seconds is where my next camera is going to be. And we'll put the camera into a new position. And we'll zoom in. All right. So it's really that simple. So we now have 2 camera frames, and we have a very smooth linear movement between the two. A way to adjust the timing is select your keyframes, hit F9, and you can manipulate the curve of your time. So I have my speed graph set up. So if I crunch these in, it's going to do a very slow move out, then it's going to speed into the next position and slowly settle in. So let's look at this and see exactly what's happening. So I'm going to hit play on the keyboard, and it's going to take a bajillion years to load this up. But now that we fast forward in time, you can watch the whole thing play out. So this is a camera move that we've animated, and it's pretty simple. Yeah, straightforward. We've got some nice curving in there to give a smooth transition out to speed up and then a smooth transition in. So this is just an example of kind of a camera move you could do. Now, if your depth of field is turned on, if you don't have your camera linked to an object that you're moving to, such as the back wall, which was not that wall, this wall. So by right-clicking camera, link focus to distance layer, if you don't have it linked, you're gonna have to adjust your focal distance to match, okay? So that means that here at keyframe 0, you'll have to keyframe it. Whoops. And then once you come to 3 seconds here, you'll have to then again adjust it. Actually, it'll go this way to be closer, so smaller pixels. Or I guess that's too far. Anyway, you get the point. You're gonna have to move this around to find the exact position that you need to be at. All right, so the next way that we're going to do a camera animation is we'll turn this off, and then I'm gonna right-click camera, and I'm gonna create, let's see, do I want an orbit null or stereo 3D rig? Let's try stereo 3D. What's gonna happen? Oh, never mind. Hey, that's really cool though, look at that. I've never clicked this, but now I have, and I can't unclick what I've seen. I'm very intrigued. Anyway, this is beyond the point. Sorry, do not click stereo 3D rig, just create a orbit null. So now your camera is attached to this null. So if I rotate the null, the set moves with it. So you can get some crazy movement in here. Okay. Oh, it's got kind of like a Dutch angle in there. Wow, that's cool. It's like a horror scene. And then if you move on the different axes, your camera's gonna move with it. So this is another way to set up your camera. To get some cool effects like that. I like how it's just very subtly on a Dutch angle. And this is where the masked bandit comes in the door. Anyway, that's another way to do it. And you would just, in order to animate, you would key your orientation or your X, Y, and Z rotations, and then you'd also key the position. So that's the way of setting up your camera. So we talked about the different focal lengths, which is your millimeters, from like a 15 millimeter up to a 200 millimeter. We talked about how to animate the camera, as well as your focal depth and your depth of field. Right, so if you turn it on, right now it looks like my focal distance is set to about the back wall. If I want it to be on this red chair right here, I'd have to get this focal point really tight so that it's like right up on the camera. All right, so now we're at about the door. We're coming into the chair, and we made it. And so the closer that you get, the more blurry your background's gonna get. And then finally, we could talk about the zoom here. So the zoom, it doesn't actually move the camera. So if you set up your focal point nicely and you wanna just get closer to it, you simply zoom in. And it's that simple. So you can animate your zoom and it will work just fine. Well guys, that wraps up this tutorial on 3D sets. I hope that building this set was fun and engaging, and I know it's very complicated, but I was really just trying to show you that After Effects is very powerful. There's so much you can do in this program. It's really left up to your imagination. So have fun with it. Show me what you guys have created. I can't wait to see it. I know that you guys are going to do some great stuff. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys.
You did it. I'm so proud of you. You created a set, you made it this far. I just want to thank you guys for watching this tutorial. I hope it was informative, and I really want to see what you guys have created. You know, by the end of it, you should have your own set that's looking pretty cool. Just show me. Upload a video or something and let me know what you think. Please feel free to like and comment and ask questions. If you have any questions, ask. That's why I'm here. So thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time.